Abusheni. Um, I like emphasizing that because it's a greeting actually close to my people. It's actually our very own Wakanda forever. So whenever I say Abusheni, your response should be Abutsonga, right? Anyway, we'll talk about that some other time. What I want to start a conversation on today, it's what Drucker calls managing with ambidexterity. I know that word is a tongue twister. And maybe, um, I guess my introduction with that word is a while back, man. When I was in the 90s, I think, you know, of all places in church. Actually, that should not be a surprise because you know how I always say church is life because of its ability to, of course, teach or equip us of various traits or characteristics in terms of enjoying relationships, enjoying I don't know business, and ultimately enjoying life. So this is one of those moments where I was sitting in church and the pastor was speaking about exactly this, to be ambidextrous. I mean, at the time, it blew my mind. I grew up in the 90s, I always say I was born in the 80s but grew up in the 90s, particularly because of what I want to touch on, in that during that time, it was a thing for us as teens to talk or rather identify bombastic words. I think another contributor was hip hop because hip hop you have to like learn stuff. So yeah, I came across that term and I was like, yo, ambidextrous. So I had a new word to sort of play with and yeah, nyompola with my with my teens or colleagues or whatever you want to call us at the time. So yeah, to be ambidextrous is exactly that, right? The ability, and I guess an example would be if you are right-handed, and you use your right hand for everything, like writing as an example, an ambidextrous person would be equally competent using his right or even his left hand. They can do whatever activity with both hands equally, so to speak. So, in the context of church, it was actually Mfundis was talking about Benjamin or the tribe of Benjamin in reference to First Chronicles chapter 32. So maybe taking a few steps back before we get in there. So the tribe of Benjamin was one of the 12 tribes of Israel. You would remember that Jacob had 12 sons, and Benjamin was one of the youngest, right? And when he was blessing his sons just before he was about to leave, he says something quite interesting about Benjamin. He says, Benjamin is a ravenous wolf. And then he says, he devours his prey in the morning, or in the morning he devours his prey, and in the evening he divides the spoil. Now, that's dramatic for me. But it has that connotation of effort and battle and war and, getting out there. He's like, oof. He's that kind of tribe, so to speak. So that's the picture I want you to have. And then later on, when Israel demanded to have king after seeing nations around them having kings, their first king actually came from the tribe of Benjamin. The name Saul, the king Saul, the first king in Israel. And in 1 Samuel 9, I think it is, the Bible describes this man as handsome, tall, head and shoulders above the rest, a mighty man, Prince Charming type of character, if you have to think about Disney type characters. So he's like there. And that was Benjamin. That's the man in Benjamin, mighty man, it even says. Now later, fast forward the picture, when it came time for David to be king, this is even before he was king, by the way, but he was in the wilderness running away from the reigning king, which was Saul, because of anointing and because of his character, which we'll get into it in maybe another talk. He attracted men from different tribes who actually supported him and standing with him, and he built these men to be actually what was later called David's mighty man, or David's mighty army, right? Now, in First Chronicles 12, it talks about him as, or rather, it talks about the tribe as mighty men who would carry bows and also slingshots. They were competent with both their right hand and their left hand. So it's in the text. So they were ambidextrous, long story short. So that's my introduction to this term. I was just giving you quick context. Now, coming back to what Drucker then talks about. Drucker, by the way, it's Peter Drucker. Many of us would know him as a management or leadership guru. He's known in leadership circles or management circles across different organizations as, a leadership coach, trainer, etc., etc. Anyway, so Peter Drucker talks about this concept of managing with ambidexterity. So he says, in a nutshell, by the way, this is part of his online MBA, so look it up, check it out, and get yourself equipped, man. Anyway, he says, managing with ambidexterity talks to managing not only in the present, what's currently happening now, but also managing in the future, right? Thinking of your business as sustainable for tomorrow. Because first things first, of course, you need to make sure that it works now, it produces, and you actually are making profit, or whatever the objectives of the company are, those you chase and lock down very well. But whilst you're doing that, don't lose sight of where you are going. That's basically what he's talking about. Don't lose sight of where you want to land. And to me, that made sense, especially in this time that we are in. We know that, for instance, the current pandemic, COVID-19, sort of turned the world upside down in business. Many companies closed down, and one could argue that they were just not ready to be future-proof, so to speak. They were not future-ready. They were not transformed for the future. And Kodak, it's usually a good example that we like using in leadership organizations or leadership management or training, whatever the case may be. In that Kodak, they actually, designed, even patented the digital camera, but they never actually got to pursue that as a business imperative because they thought we are the biggest, we are making good money at the time. So what I'm trying to say there is that they lacked the future look. And what then happened is that other players came into the market when the digital stuff or revolution came. They took over that and they ran with it. And there are people who would be listening or looking at this video and not even know who I'm talking about when I say Kodak. And that's what you're talking about. Part of being future ready or managing with ambidexterity from a future point of view would mean the ability to pivot whenever you need to. The ability to identify different markets or segments of the market that you might want to play into. Because sometimes what you did, or rather, what you know and did before you got here was good enough to get you here, but it might not be good enough to get you where you need to be. So that's what managing with ambidexterity comes from. And this is not only about organizations or even business, but also personally as well. That's why we say or encourage spending time looking down what is it that you want, what can you do today to get it, what can you continue to do to build towards it for tomorrow. That's looking both at the current and the future. Now, Drucker also touched on the how of it, right? He talks about the 80-20 principle, the Pareto principle. Most of us would know it, in that you can spend 80% of your time, energy, effort looking after the current operations, but please take 20% of that and calculate or even invest in what you can do tomorrow, so that when the company, or rather, so that your company survives for tomorrow, but also that when it gets to the tomorrow, it can actually compete in that time. Makes sense for me. I hope it does for you too. One last thing that I'm just quickly thinking of, it's again back to the text, man. So there's another character in the Bible called Nehemiah. So this man basically heard about, the desolate state of the city of Jerusalem and the walls that have literally broken down, because of war or whatever the case may be. So when he had that, a dream was conceived inside of him to say, no, I need to build the city walls. So he was never happy, up until he was then to a point where he requested his king, because he was a cupbearer, by the way, he was serving before the king. He requested the king to say, can I please go back and finish this assignment? So sometimes you might need to pause from what you're doing, Identify something that's closer to your heart and pursue it. But anyway, so he got to Jerusalem, fast forward the picture, and when he got there, of course, he made his assessments, calculated the cost, got some of the provisions from the king's letter, by the way. And then there was opposition. There were people in Jerusalem, some of his kinsmen, that did not want him to build, or at least to be successful in restoring the walls. Interesting. There's always, we call them haters, There's always someone who's against what you need to achieve. So in his case, it got to a point where they were threatening or even trying to harm him physically. Not only him, but also the people that were helping him. So it got to a point where Nehemiah actually armed his builders. Listen to this. His builders to also operate as the army or an army. Basically, they had to lay bricks with one hand and have swords in the other hand. Like as they lay bricks, swords were here. Imagine that. I mean, if you have to actually be armed, it means the enemy was actually not far away or still coming. There was no watchman who would say, they are coming, or nothing like that. The enemy was right here, waiting for them to fall so that they can actually seize the day and actually disrupt the work. Interesting. So they had to actually carry the sword, which whatever happens, they can stand for themselves. So enemies sometimes are not very far. They're right next to us. So that's actually an interesting twist with Nehemiah. So I guess the ambidexterity there, it's about them building on one hand and protecting themselves in the other. This thing of actually dual operation is important. Oh, let's put it in this context. Managing with ambidexterity, it's not a luxury. It's actually a must. You have no choice. You have to, for your business to survive, and you have to really, for whatever work or dream you have in your heart to come to pass. Hope this helps. Thanks a lot for tuning in. Definitely let's engage. So comments, likes, the works, right? Would love to hear from you. Thanks.